What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here. Today we're gonna do a Seraph Snow standard deck profile, also known as the prison deck. So let's get right into it. Hey there, amigos. Quick sponsorship shoutouts. So Next Level Gaming has the playmats available. As you can see, I have the Zorga playmat. It's super nice, really good quality too. There's some for the other units and characters from overdress too. So if you're a fan of those, definitely check out the website. You can click on the description below for the 10% discount to get a 10% discount on your next purchase. The winning image from set 1 has not really changed at all with set 2. In fact, we are still prisoning units, being able to generate triple drive with Seraph Snow's skill over here, and also making at least solid 23k columns and plus to be able to provide pressure so we can actually win those games. And so with set 2, it really brought more options of actually imprisoning units. For those that don't know, imprisoning is basically locking your opponent's units into the prison card, and then they have the option to spend a counter blast to bring back 2 or a soul blast to bring back 1. And so you're forcing your opponent to use their resources, which helps your winning image to push through and then hurts their winning image where they may need those resources to actually execute them. And so with this set, we got cards such as 24-hour coverage over here, where if you play this card, Soul Blast 1, when your opponent has 4 or more cards, they actually choose a card from their hand and put it into the prison. And so if you actually have 3 of them already imprisoned, then you can choose one of your units and get plus 5k. So this helps prisoning cards from the hand. We have the grade 2 that does that already, but this is an additional card that is helpful in that regard. And not only that, but it helps dwindle their hand resources, which is one of the biggest things for Vanguard, is that your hand, you need it for actually guarding. And we have over here turquoise, which is kind of cool in the respect that it has the opposite effect. So what happens when your opponent unlocks their units, right? And so when your opponent unprisons them and actually puts them into the board, they lose 5k, as long as this unit is in the front row, of course. And if you have 2 of them, guess what? They lose 10k, and so they can go into negative as well, making it challenging for them to use those units and making it a lot easier for you to actually survive the barrage or attacks. Sometimes you make their units not able even to hit at all, unless they had like a trigger or a booster that is really good in that regard too. Not only that, but if during your turn to continue skill, if you have 2 or more of your opponent's cards that are imprisoned, this unit gets plus 5k. So it's also a beater. This card is valuable because it's a 15k plus an 8k booster, makes that 23k line that we want. So that is still there. And not only that, but we have cards of Bagumaru over here, which actually imprisons units from the drop zone. So for example, as an act regard circle, if 1 or less cards are imprisoned currently, you can rest this unit and choose one of the cards from your opponent's drop and imprison into your prison. This helps build up to that 1-to-3 ratio a lot easier, especially if they don't have cards on the field to imprison. So that is very key and very vital, especially if you want to see this early on. It starts setting up with cards where they would start requiring 2 or more, and then of course over here Seraph Snow with 3 or more, so she can get that extra drive check. And then we have some cards over here that are a little more defensive and also help with the minute image. But we're here with Violet. She is really good because she serves almost like a PG. So you can put this onto your guarded circle, and if you have 1 or more of your opponent's cards that are imprisoned, you can Soul Blast 1. Choose one of your opponent's units that choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit by a grade 2 or less unit attacking that battle. So it's like a PG, but for grade 2 or less, and then it's just using a Soul Blast instead of a discard 1. It's really helpful with actually guarding. Of course, you have your PGs, but having that actual 1-card guard is just super helpful. And then lastly, here we have a tech card, Eclipse Moonlight. So Eclipse Moonlight is really something for Orpheus, and you're probably thinking, why is this card even in prison? And so what it does is that when you play this order, you can counter blast 1 and generate a Shadow Army token. Now those tokens are actually 15k boosters, but it can also serve as attackers too. Not only that, but they help with the winning image of making those 23k columns, especially with the booster of an 8k, or you boosting the 8k to make those columns. And then of course, when you get to units like turquoise over here, I'll explain a little bit, but it makes those magic numbers too, where it'd be 25k or 30k. So now as you're seeing the news changes with set 2, let's start getting into actual the ratios and why we play them, and then finishing up with an example play as well. Onto the right line, but also the prison card over here real fast, it's Galactolus. So essentially that's where you're imprisoning your units as an order set card, and so again, they have to spend a counter blast to unprison 2, or Soul Blast 1 to unprison 1, and at that point you're making them use their resources. You search this immediately with the grade 1, so that's what the grade 1 does, is that when it's placed on Vanguard circle, you can search your deck up to 1 prison card and add it to your hand. So when you play this, you also have to rest the cards and show charge 3 cards, which is good going first because then you can rest your Vanguard, but if you're going second, making sure that you have a grade 1 or a grade 0 back row that you can rest, and that way your Vanguard can still attack, so you can get that drive check, which is very vital at that point too. And then once you actually ride to grade 2 over here, we have Reset Pink, and so when it's placed onto Vanguard Circle, your opponent chooses one of the cards in hand and imprisons it. That's where first from actually the starter deck, we got able to prison cards from hand. This is the only card that was at that time, but thanks to the 24-hour coverage card, we were able to use that order to also do the same thing. But just having this as a solid right line option really helps with those numbers of making it to 1 to 2 prison cards before your grade 3 turn. Now once you get to your grade 3 turn over here, you know, Seraph Snow has 2 skills: continuous Vanguard during your turn. If 1 or more of your opponent's cards are imprisoned, this gets plus 10k, and then if they have 3 or more imprisoned, this unit gets an additional drive check. That's super impactful. So it's a 23k triple drive Vanguard. So on its own, it could actually swing pretty well, and then if you have a booster, it's just more harder to guard for your opponent, and it generates advantage if you think about it, because you do have that extra drive check, and not only that, but you have more pressure to get criticals, front triggers, and of course the over trigger for Brandt Gate, which is actually super deadly and super useful with this deck's winning image. And the last skill, again, it's an act, but it's also a Vanguard Circle and a Reguard Circle. Some people forget that this can be used on Reguard Circle as well, and so you can counterblast 1, choose 2 of your opponent's Reguards, and imprison them. So this is basically counterblast 1 to take 2 out, you know, and that's where you use a 2-for-1 kind of thing. And it's super helpful because you always have your Vanguard where you can start imprisoning units, and then you have other Reguards or orders to help you further imprison cards. So you want to make sure you have that imprisoning pressure. Now for the grade 3s in the main deck, there's not really much except for Seraph Snow herself. You just want extra copies to be able to Persona ride. That gives you a flat, you know, 10k to the front row, which synergizes with what the deck is trying to do. Most of the time you will be attacking with Vanguard first, so if you do drive check a front trigger or any triggers, it's just helpful with those Reguards to get bigger and bigger. And then of course you can call it to Reguard Circle if you really need to use the counterblast to imprison 2 more units outside of the Vanguard skill as well. Now into the grade 2s in the main deck. We are still playing for the Ago Rogue from set 1. This card is still useful and very phenomenal. So continuous Reguard and Guardian Circle. If you have 2 or more of your opponent's cards imprisoned, you can actually get plus 5k power and then 10k shield. So it's super useful because it becomes that 15k beater, and again with the 8k booster makes that 23k line. But not only that, but it's phenomenal shield as well. You can intercept with it, you can guard it from hand, having that 15k shield. It's just very handy sometimes where you may not have enough shield to be able to guard certain barrage of attacks or certain like numbers at that point too. With set 2, we got turquoise over here. Like I said, is that, you know, when people imprison their units, they get minus 5k as long as this unit is in the front row, of course. This helps weaken in their barrage of attacks or winning image, and of course if you have 2, it's minus 10k. So if something that was less than 10k got called, you can go to negative as well. A grade 2 would just go to 0 and so on, and it's just fairly annoying because most people will try to get rid of this card as fast as possible with retire effects or removal effects in general. So just be mindful of that as soon as you call this card, more than likely it's going to be one of the first Reguards that they're going to take out, you know, and so just be mindful of that. But it's also great as a phenomenal booster early on too as well, and also have the defensive synergy where if they try to unprison stuff, they're not doing as much as they normally would do. And so here we have Violet. Like I said, she is the PG in a way where, you know, when this is put into Guardian Circle, and if you have 1 or more units that are in prison currently, then you can Soul Blast 1 and then perfect guard anything that's a grade 2 or less. So it's super helpful just having, in a sense, 6 perfect guards in the deck on top of the extra shields such as like Ago Road and other cards that help with that too. And it's also, you could call it to Reguard Circle, and you can actually put it into the Guardian Circle with intercept. It actually works because it's put, not place, so just be mindful of that. And then you can use other cards like over here, 24-hour coverage, where, you know, you use the skill Soul Blast 1 if they have 4 or more, imprison 1 from their hand, but choose a unit that give plus 5. That's where you can give Violet plus 5, and it actually becomes that 15k number, then boosted by an 8k booster, makes that 23k line. So there's some synergy there where you can have, or you can just beefy up more units, or if you have a Seraph Snow as a Reguard Circle that can get beefy and make magic numbers too. Again, with 24-hour coverage and Eclipse Moonlight, I've seen a lot of people play the 24-hour coverage, and one of the reasons that I play too is that I found myself not using it as often as I would think. In theory, it's a great card to use turn by turn, but I realized that every time you use this card, it's a -1 in your book. Yes, you can use the drive check to help you mitigate that, but you're already calling other cards such as Ago Road and Turquoise from hand to make sure you have a solid field foundation, and then at the same time you're dwindling your hand size at that point. So if you have another card that's trying to imprison, but then it might just use you 1 card and not put something on the board, then it just makes it a little more challenging at that point. And that's why I looked at Eclipse Moonlight. This is actually pointed out with Machina Blau. Really good guy, and he plays Brandt Gate in general, and we've seen other decks that also plays in Eclipse Moonlight. Again, it helps generate these shadow tokens. Counterblast 1, generate a shadow army token. It's a 15k booster again, it's a 15k attacker, but what it does is that, with Turquoise, it helps with that early game, like I said, becomes either a 25 or 30k line that can go through 2 trigger thresholds if your opponent is still a grade 2 or less, and so you can have really early pressure that makes it hard for them to guard. And then once you get to grade 3, if your opponent's at 3 or 4 damage, triple drive becomes very scary. Just think about that for a second. And so it helps with that regard too, and forces that 20k shield once they're at grade 3. So if, for example, 13k drop a front trigger that demands a 20k shield, which is 33, and that's because you're a 30k column at that point. So no 15k guard would just stop a 23k line anymore because you're bigger than that. On to the grade 1s. We're playing for Chevy Stud, 4 of the PG. We are playing for Bagu Motor, and so with Chevy Stud, the auto bot over here, he's still useful, and so he has an act. Once per turn, you can counterblast, soul blast 1, choose one of your opponent's rear guards and imprison it. It doesn't matter if it's in the front row or the rear or the back row, so that's really key in that respect. And then if you have three of them or more are imprisoned right now, then you draw a card, and so that helps you build advantage back. So you can call this card, get a card back in a sense while imprisoning one of your opponent's units. So if you think about it, let's say you use your Seraph Snow, that's 2 cards. Now you use your Seraph Star, guess what? That's your 3rd card. You have triple drive. That helps compensate with that, and also drawing a card on top of that. So it's just very useful. Just be moderate with using your counterblast because we are not playing Mobile Mine or other counter chargers in this deck. So just be mindful of that, especially since we're playing the Eclipse Moonlight that also uses a counterblast. So just be mindful of that too. PG, of course, that's the best one that, if you have 2 or less cards or 1 or less cards, you just discard it. So no need to discard. Bagu Motor is a lot more practically important than I thought it was at first. I honestly thought that I would maybe play 2 or 3 because once you see 1, you pretty much are good to go. But the thing is, you want to play 4 because you wanted to see it as soon as possible, and sometimes your opponent may be just filtering cards out of the prison, and at that point, if you have 2 of these, you can imprison 2 cards from the drop zone, and then your other skills are still live, whether it be imprisoning from the hand or imprisoning from the field. And so you can start adding more cards to that prison, which helps with making sure they have 1 or 2 cards in prison when you use cards for Violet and so on, like Turquoise and so on, and all those cards like Aga Road. So it's just very vital in that respect, and it rests itself. So one of the things that I do is that I put it behind Vanguard, because most of the time the Vanguard can sweep by itself and be good, because you want to make sure your rear guard columns are still making, again, those 23k plus columns to be able to do those threatening turns as well. And it almost looks like Mecha Godzilla from the Godzilla series. You got Autobots, you got like Mecha Godzilla, and then you got other cards, and it's just an awesome deck to play with. And so yeah, let's get right into the next trigger lineups and then go into the combos. Lastly, the triggers. One of the new additions from set 2 is that we got the front triggers. That is, if your opponent's a Vanguard grade 3 or greater, this unit gets plus 5k shield. So this is where I was talking about, you have a 20k shield card that you could just drop, making things a lot easier to guard and save hand at that point. You want to play 4 because 2, it helps you with your hand advantage, and then the other pro for it is because you attack with Vanguard first most of the time. So you're gonna get crits, you're gonna get fronts, it's still very beneficial. So I realized that once you go from 23 to 33, it makes a lot of a difference. So just having that option and much be more threatening is very vital at that point too. We are still playing crits here, so we are playing in this case 4 plus 3 crits, so 7 crits. We have the over trigger that also helps with doubling the crit, doubling the power of all your front row units. Again, if you have like cards such as like the front trigger or your crit triggers that resolve first before you drove check the over trigger, it doubles those power-ups together, and so it really makes those units even bigger at that respect too. So this over trigger for this deck is really good. And of course we have our 4 heals, so that way we can actually heal damage, and it's really the only way in a sense we can counter charge, because we just heal the damage that is face down at that point. Onto the combo part of the video. So I just want to show some early gameplay where it can be helpful on making like big columns early on to make it harder for your opponent to guard. So right here we have the prison, we also have the Eclipse Moonlight being played, so we had a counterblast that we used over here to spawn this unit, and then we have Bagu Motor over here that imprisoned 1 unit, and then when we rolled Vanguard with right here Rosette Pink, it imprisoned another unit from their hand. And so we have now 2, which meets the requirements to get the additional 5k power. So now you have a 30k line. And so if you want, you can attack with the Vanguard with 10, and then any triggers, this is the 30k at that point. You can start making bigger numbers too with adding more units over here as well. Let's just say we add Aggro Road, and because they had a unit that they called on early on, we imprison 3 units at that point with using a Soul Blast skill. You can have another 23k line here as well to make those numbers efficient. If you want to be a little more conservative, you can call something like, you can call this here and then have this here, so you can poke, and this is 15 plus 8, that's 23k. So even if they got a trigger threshold, they can't really go over that. But one of the key things that I want to make sure to really explicitly point out is that if you have something like this, your Vanguard is 10k. If they get a trigger, this still hits over that, right? And then this still hits over 2 triggers on top of that, because you're hitting that magic number of 30k. So it's just making sure that you have 3 solid attacks that can get through, potentially put your opponent to 2 to 3 damage as soon as this you get to this point. And then once you get to your grade 3 turn, it just kind of like snowballs into this kind of field. You can use your Counterblast to imprison, you can use other cards to imprison. So let's just say you make at least a 3 minimum requirement. So your Vanguard now can attack with, you know, being 23, and if you have a booster, that becomes 31. Triple drive. This again is a 23k column, and this again is a 30k column, which again, if your Vanguard, if their Vanguard is grade 2, it makes it harder for them to guard. They can't even drop a 20k shield. They have to drop 2 cards. But if they're a grade 3 Vanguard, then they have to drop at least a 20k shield to make it a 1 card guard at that point. So it's just be mindful of those numbers and be able to like rip more cards out of your opponent's hand, and also just taking away their resources, so that way you can actually just win the game. I also wanted to give a shout out to Machina Blau for hooking me up with the Access Vanguard sleeves over here. As you can see, these are actually pretty cool, and I just use them for the right line too, and I just wanted to get a chance to show these off too, so they're pretty awesome. Again, Access Vanguard is a blog that actually has deck studies and a lot of other blog articles, so if you're interested, click down in the description below, the link to, and read it on Vanguard content that is written. And that's the deck profile, amigos. I hope you enjoyed the deck profile. I've actually been having a lot of fun with this deck, and having the tech choice over here with Eclipse Moonlight has been actually pretty fun to use, and being helped with that aggression, helping with building those fields. I noticed that when I wasn't playing it and I was playing like the 24-hour coverage at 3 to 4, I found myself lacking boosters, and I think that some of us have realized that, like, man, the grade 2s, the front row riggers are really great, but I really need a booster to make those numbers to become much more threatening outside of just the Vanguard. And so that's why I feel like this card's a little more flexible, where it's a booster, but also it could be an attacking rigger if you really need it to be with the Shadow Army token. And of course, the other cards just help with the winning image overall with this deck. It's really fun in this sense where it's a control deck in the sense of taking away your opponent's resources and forcing them to use resources that they don't wish to do so, because they want to use those resources for their skills, for their winning image, and so on. It's honestly a really fun deck, and so I definitely recommend that too. And then if you guys want to support the channel, obviously we have Next Level Gaming here with the beautiful mat. We have not only Zorga, but they also have a Brandt Gate 1 too as well, so be on the lookout for that. Not only that, if you like the cards and want to get some from TCG Player, you could always use the affiliated link to support the channel. And again, if you like the video, like it, leave a thumbs up, tell me some of your feedback. What are some things that are working for you? What are some things that you're trying out? What are some things that have you felt that this deck still needs and you want to improve on? And obviously share it to an amigo that loves Brandt Gate 2 or just likes overdress standard in general. And then again, subscribe.